The Roman Empire literally dominates the history school books. Again and again, it is underlined that it is the Greco-Roman culture that placed the bedrock of everything that we call civilization. Strange, though, that there are no actual artifacts proving the existence of this grand empire. Also a bit strange that the cartographers that were living at the time when this empire was supposedly flourishing and was at its peak also didn't notice it. For example, Wikipedia assures us that a Roman cartographer made it at the peak time of empire, this particular map, and yet we just see Italia, where it is found nowadays. No hint that it is the center of all these vast territories that we read about in the modern school books. Or maybe the famous map of Ptolemy. Here we read, the Ptolemy world map is a map of the world known to Hellenistic society in the 2nd century. So with big letters he mentions Dacians and Aryans and other Africans, and for the supposedly the Grand Empire that was at its peak at that time, just a small Italia and no sign that it was governing all the civilized world. And again, the cartographers supposedly lived in this very Roman Empire and exactly at the time of its peak. Now we're being told that this is a copy of a 4th century itinerary map showing the roads that were built and supposedly controlled and maintained by Rome in its Roman Empire. Here, when we rotate the map, probably you will notice the peculiar boot shape of Italy on it. Instead of the grand Roman Empire, we simply see simple Italia, and moreover the place it is found nowadays, not bigger than that. Or maybe this Ta, Li, A. Yes, there is a king in Rome, but this doesn't mean he is the king of all the countries on the map, because there are other kings as well on the map. If indeed the various countries that are depicted on this map are just the provinces of the great Roman Empire, why no hint is given us of the supremacy of its center, Rome? And same is the situation with all those maps that the mainstream historians themselves assure us are the early world maps. Only in the 17th and 18th century these types of maps start appearing, where if you have a good faith you could agree that this indeed resembles the modern maps of the Roman Empire that we see in our school books. This is a copy, 17th-18th century copy of the Ortelius maps. But the 17th and 18th century, that is already at the time when the new fabricated history was established. So this was drawn following what they read in the books, cannot be taken as proof, cannot be taken as a really authentic old map. Yes, possibly and likely this royal cartographer of 16th century, Abraham Ortelius, was indeed famous and respected, and that is why we read that his maps and atlases were issued in hundreds. And here comes the interesting part. Only one single piece has survived. Numerous copies made much later have survived, and although they all respected him and copied his work, somehow, again like with the old books, after making the copy, the originals always disappear. Why would they be so negligent to the authentic maps of the cartographer they respect so much? Or was there a cleanup of the real history before the substitute was established? For example, the World Digital Library offers a free digital copy of his World Atlas, supposedly the original one from the 16th century. But if you read the analysis provided by Anatoly Fomenko in his book that I have provided link to, you will find many details that suggest that these were much later copies made in the 17th and 18th century. But even in its edited condition, this is how he saw the antique world. You see completely different countries. Scythia and Sarmatia are much bigger than we are told, while the great Roman Empire is missing absolutely 100%. Let's search together for some places where we hope to find some tangible proofs of the existence of this Roman Empire. I'll briefly touch the Latin inscriptions, the so-called Roman villas, amphitheaters, and even Roman cities found all over Europe, Africa, and Asia, and also some of the symbols of the supposedly great empire in the city of Rome itself. Let's first of all clear a misunderstanding. When the people in the past would say Rome, that wouldn't necessarily mean the city in nowadays Italy, but there were at least 3 Romes. It was primarily a title. The first Rome was Istanbul, the second one, the Rome we know in Italy, and the third one was Moscow. In some sources you will find the places of the first 2 switched, but it doesn't matter anyway. The important point is that if in certain historic record it is mentioned that the rulers of Rome did this or that, it doesn't necessarily mean that those were exactly the emperors of the Rome located in Italy. Since there are no original Roman books that are available for the public, at least they could be in the Vatican hidden. But anyhow, old books are not available. So let's now go first to the city of Rome itself and see if we can find some tangible proof of the existence of the empire over there on the spot. The Capitoline wolf is the most famous symbol of Rome. That's why they have put the supposedly ancient statue in their main museum. Years ago, the restorator Anna Maria Karuba noticed, according to the techniques that were used in manufacturing the statue, that it was actually most likely late Renaissance work. Even after that, for many years, it was still exhibited in the museum as ancient statue. Just recently, at least, they are accepting that it is not, but I sincerely doubt they have removed it from the Museum of Ancient Works. Their most ancient artifact does not prove at all the existence of any vast empire at all, and happens to be just a nice artistic work, a couple of 100 years old. That's all. Well, that didn't work. Let's try something very solid. This impressive statue of supposedly Marcus Aurelius dominates this square of Rome, but how do they know who is it on the statue? After all, initially it was supposedly the Emperor Constantine. Yes, there is an inscription on the stone that it is placed on, but it is very well known and accepted by everybody that this inscription is a Renaissance work that was later on added to the statue. So who is on the original statue? That was determined following a very simple and ingenious method. A certain librarian a few centuries ago was browsing old Roman coins, and his sharp eyesight noticed a resemblance, and at that moment he understood that on this statue it is only Marcus Aurelius and it cannot be anybody else. And so it has been adopted as scientific history. A Roman should be used in its correct meaning and everything will come into place then. Anatoly Fomenko mentions that indeed these earlier antique cultures called themselves Romans. At least something of that sort, Romaic, Roman, and that started in very early times when Egypt was still the center of more or less the civilization. So if we understand a Roman to mean belonging to this ancient culture that had its basis the knowledge that they received from the advanced civilizations before them, yes, then we can say all this is Roman, all the Roman statues, Roman cities, villas, and so on. Yes, they did belong to that antique culture, but it doesn't mean that they were built or connected necessarily with the city of Rome. Yes, a small portion definitely were connected with the city of Rome because it was one of the big cities in this culture at a certain period, but definitely not all of it. And so we go to a museum and there are endless Roman statues and all they have very clear labels who is supposedly depicted. But how do they know these so-called historians? Was there written on the statue? That's very rare. And even if there is a name, what to speak of a history? That's really not written on the statue. What is the history of this person? Maybe in extremely rare case it will be written Octavius, but who was this Octavius? Prince, merchant, priest? Where did he live? We don't know these things. They're just modern labels that somebody decided to put there. Now let's look at these wonderful, luxurious, opulent buildings, the so-called Roman villas. The mainstream historians assure us that Romans, in sense of people coming from Rome to conquer the territories, have built them and lived in them. But yet they skip giving any evidence of why is that so. If indeed people coming from the city of Rome used to live in these villas, then why on the numerous mosaics found in the villas themselves, in everyday scenes, people of completely different races are depicted? After all, those very same historians assure us that Rome in Italy was populated by the race that lives there nowadays as well, that is, Latino people. They are relatively shorter with somewhat darker complexion and definitely dark hair, while on the mosaics we see somewhat Scandinavian looking people, predominantly blonde and kind of tall. Most definitely, the mosaics are full of blondes. There is also a vast body of artifacts depicting black people in Roman times. The mainstream historians quickly get rid of that theme by labeling them all as slaves and servants. But a careful look at the actual artifacts will show that these were very well placed, respected, and affluent citizens. They were definitely often rulers, noble people, and saints. Please don't be confused by the fact that many of the images that now I show of black people seem to belong to later pages of history and not really antiquity. Don't forget the episode where I showed that actually antiquity means Middle Ages because these 1000 years were artificially stretched into 2000 years. And that is why it is very well known and accepted fact even by the mainstream historians that the artists in the past were always depicting antique characters with medieval outfits. And of course they find explanation for everything. This time they blamed it to the stupidity of the medieval artists. But in the light of the history of new chronology, the way I am presenting it here, it just looks normal. The artists were depicting whatever they actually saw. So there was a tangible black presence of respectable, noble people, much more than we know of in Europe and in Asia. And the reason for that is that although the initial small group of survivors were of Scandinavian looks, they were actively mixing with the nations that they were giving their culture to. And that is why, as we heard in Popol Vuh, in the later stages of survivors, and the Roman times are later stages of survival culture, that's why we see a very much international crowd. That's why Popol Vuh said they were all of different races and they spoke all kinds of different languages. We also saw how intercontinental travel was very well developed. And at the times that we are used to calling Roman, it was non-different. It was very, very international place, the antique world. And the black people were much more respected. And it is a very recent development that these false lies about slavery just blurred the full truth. Situation with slavery is completely different from what we are presented in the mass media, with the history school books being just a subdivision of this propaganda campaign. First of all, it is not the black race only or even predominantly that became a victim of slavery. Other races, and especially Caucasian people, were the prime targets of this tool that was introduced by the parasites to lower the consciousness of the human race. I'd like to read a quote from you about the slavery in Russia. It was called крепостное право, but the fact that they put a different label on it doesn't change the essence of what it really was. So Francesco da Colo shares his following witness account. The noble cavalier Francesco da Colo was in the area of Moscow in year 1518. He says, people are sold in those areas along with the other chicken and domestic animals. All you need is just to make a contract with the seller. In the city of Moscow, some of our chaps bought a couple of very young virgins, age 15 to 18. Truly amazingly beautiful girls. They got them for entertainment. The bargain price was very good, only 1 ducat or 1 ungar. And not only you get the girls for such a bargain price, but when they have children, they remain your own, and then you can sell them as well on this same market. It is true that they don't allow them to be exported from the country, but as long as you own them inside the country, you can really do with them whatever you wish. And this is just one very small example. Many other examples you can find in the couple of links that I provide in the description of this video. So the truth about the slavery was given a complete makeover and presented in an absolutely wrong light nowadays by the so-called history, and it is used to further instigate hatred between races. For example, the white people must feel guilt about something that they didn't really do collectively as a race, and the black people must feel as useless and good only for servants, although they were noble people at the time of the survivors. And I hope that we collectively as human people will soon wake up from this artificial reality that we have been put in by the parasites using the technique divide and conquer. As long as we continue to spend our lives in petty hatred towards the neighbors who happen to be of different color or a different nation, we will never see the big picture. big picture that we are beings of light, that we have come here to this planet to live a beautiful life in a beautiful green nature surroundings, instead of poisoning each other and going to war and other horrible things we do with our planet and lives. Well, this website, I took many of the images from it, the real history, www.com. They have done a really good work. I mean, they have collected artifacts, they have presented evidence of forged history. But what is their conclusion after all that? That the hideous white people have distorted the history to deprive us of our legacy. Wait a minute, you so easily forget the times when the black people, along with the normal white people, were living in peace and mutual respect. And just because a small group of white people have decided to turn into parasites, that's why the full race should be treated as your enemies? There are criminals in every race, without exception. There are criminals among the Caucasian people. This is not a secret. This doesn't mean that the full race is originally like this. It wasn't. See your own research. Times were different. Take a big bunch of twigs, wooden twigs. You cannot break them as long as they stay together, but if you take them one by one, you will break them easily. In the same way, as long as we continue to buy the parasitic propaganda of fighting each other because we belong to different races, groups, or nations, we will never have time to lift up our heads and start educating ourselves. And education and knowledge is the only way that we can get ourselves out from the very deep ditch that we have buried ourselves in by accepting ignorance. In the old books of England, it is very clearly written that really many of the nobles were black people. During the fabrication of the false history, false portraits were made so that these nobles will look all white, Caucasians. And this is an excellent example of whitenized portrait of this Stuart. On the left is the original one, and on the right is the false one. Why all that? Because the parasites, when they are incorporating their parasitic ideas, they made allies with people from the Caucasian race, and that's why they give them kind of a better position. And the majority of Caucasian people buy into this nonsense. Their logic is, okay, I don't care if this history is real or not, but since I'm living a better life, it is okay for me, because anything is okay as long as I live well. And this person who thinks he is very clever is actually in the position of a prisoner who at least has a private cell and is not in shackles and can freely walk from one corner of his prison cell to the other without being raped by 5 other prisoners, unlike some others. And so he proudly considers himself a free man because he can walk from one corner of the cell to the other. In the same way, we live in such a small, closed reality and think we are free just because our prison cell is somewhat more spacious. Again, black researchers are doing excellent job. They are noticing that the Egyptian history is also distorted in a way to exaggerate the white influence. And when I say white race, the one that is exaggerated, it's not the people with the Scandinavian looks that were bringing the survivor culture, but it was the people with Arab looks. They genetically belong to the white race, and were also found in Egypt along with the black Nubians. So the black researchers very well observe that also when they fabricate the history, they artificially insert the sense that those brown people with Caucasian DNA were racist towards the Nubians. But then instead of inquiring into the real situation, they fall into the pitfall of racism themselves and just declare, oh, Egypt was all black and Nubian, instead of really looking at the endless paintings, if they don't believe the translated sources, because any translation cannot be trusted. There are endless paintings, and you can see people of all color over there in ancient Egypt. And there were not only this the one on the far right, he is supposedly the Caucasian DNA, but also we see completely white, and not only one, two types, one with antenna on his head and one without. Why deny their role in ancient Egypt? I mean, those completely white ones. After all, even in a very recent time, at the time of Mamelukes, we saw a blonde ruler, a very small core of people with even translators all around. The blonde Mamelukes were respected by the local population, otherwise they wouldn't remain alive. Just a small group, if they were not behaving well, their throats would be cut in no time. As we saw in the episode of Egypt, that they were the protectors of the pyramids. Once they were gone, then the dismantling started. Please, all of you, don't fall into the parasitic racist propaganda and tend towards one color or another. There were all kinds of shades of people that were educated enough to peacefully coexist in Egypt. Few murals, you saw all kinds of shades of white to brown and black, and here you see even blue ones. Plenty of grounds to accept that even races that we would call now alien with our limited worldview were peacefully living amongst the people of ancient Egypt. But let's get back to the Roman villas. So who lived in these villas after all? Did the people leave some sort of record who they were? Yes, first of all, there are the swastika signs really all over. They are the main symbol of the residents of these villas. And this is an ancient sign that is present on all continents without exceptions. Even the Indians in America were waving them in their blankets, and it's in their ancient pottery. So this is definitely one of the main, if not the very main symbol of the survivor culture, and no wonder it is the main symbol in the so-called Roman villas. The examples here are just countless. Swastikas of all kinds of and description are simply all over all Roman things. So what about inscriptions? Maybe the residents wrote down something, who they are, or something of this sort. Actually, inscriptions, although very, very rare to exist, have been found indeed in some so-called Roman villas, and this is a lovely example from Portugal, the villa, the 3D reconstruction of which you see at the moment. Exceptional thing here is, as the guided tour of the villa itself on the spot tells us, at the end of the tour they mention that they have found 200 tablets with names written on them. Interestingly enough, they mentioned that one of the names on those tablets is Roman. Well, sad that they didn't mention what is that Roman name, why they think it's Roman, and most importantly, what are all the other names. Well, apparently they thought that would be inappropriate for the general public. Let's see some Roman villa mosaic inscriptions. I'm sure the linguistic specialists have it all figured out, and they have all these endless variations of ancient languages and Latin and how the Romans, different types of Latin and how it originated. But if we forget all these theoretical things and look at the very inscription, what we see is that most of the names can be read by the Slavic people using their current alphabet. For example, this even the mainstream historians tell us that this story depicts how some clown was taking the clothes of certain lady under this pretext and so on and so on. But with straightforward Slavic letters, it is written Satyros, that it is clown. We use it, that's the word even nowadays. And so is valid for many other characters whose inscriptions I am showing you right now. There is no reason whatsoever to connect these inscriptions with the city of Rome or some Scheherazade Roman Empire. Language is absolutely similar to the writing and language the Scythians and Sarmatians were using. These were ancient people. They were always living in this, well, not always, but since thousands of years, they were living in these areas. This was their writing, why it should be categorized as Roman. And this is from a wonderful so-called Roman villa in Zeugma. The so-called Roman villas were masterpieces of not only engineering but arts as well. They had the toilets with running water, also floor heating, central floor heating with water, swimming pools, hundreds of fountains, running hot water, and wonderful flower gardens, etc., etc. So, looking at these facts, one would assume that they were built by specialists in their area, I mean qualified builders and artists, right? Well, countless quality TV documentaries and even some history school books assure us that all this was built by the Roman soldiers. In a mainstream British TV documentary aired on prime channels, I even heard how they assure us that the Roman soldiers were walking marathon distances daily, and then in the evening they were building not only these Roman villas but the amazing aqueducts that would have, let's say, 1% decline in kilometers. I mean, that's very precise calculations. Also, countless municipal and so on public Roman buildings. That's huge. That requires education. Roman soldiers were supposedly spending their lives in military education. That's what mainstream scientists assure us. They didn't have engineering or building education, and yet, with the help of equally unqualified slaves, they would build all these miracles in their spare time. Without slightest hesitation, they present Arabian Night Tales of 1001 Nights as scientific history. Let me tell you one such tale that somebody decided to write and all the others copy and paste, distributed without slightest thinking. It's about the Caesar's bridge over the river Rhine. It is quite a deep and big river. The bridge would be some half-kilometer long. And all that the magician Aladdin, oh excuse me, the Roman soldiers, built within 10 days, just complete, including, cutting the wood, well, manually from the forest, dragging it, and constructing this, and it was ready in 10 days. And here Scheherazade even added a very insightful note. Oh, in our modern world, with our advanced technology, we're still very far away from being able to build any bridge over rain within the river Rhine within 10 days. But the reason for that is that we don't have those thousands of soldiers that are ready to give their lives at any time to Caesar. Oh, pardon, that was not Scheherazade, that was one of those respected professors that sit in the expensive leather chairs doing copy and paste. Oh, pardon, researching history. But I must say that this fairy tale is much less credible than the Arabian Nights, because I mean these goals that the Caesar was supposedly attacking, that's why he built the bridge to get over to them. I mean, were they just sitting on the other side and drinking Bloody Mary, and it never crossed their minds to just take their bows and kill the Romans while they were so vulnerable, exposed on the bridge, coming to them? Very strange fairy tales. Once I very casually asked the real historian. By the way, he had no idea what I'm working on and what are my views and who am I. He didn't know anything about me. So I just mentioned and I said, I find it really ridiculous that they tell us that these Roman soldiers built fantastic engineering achievements, and while they didn't even have time for it, they were always, you know, fighting, and they didn't have qualifications for it, nor the numbers. I said it looks ridiculous from all sides. What he said was, it looks ridiculous to you because you don't know anything about history. Now this is typical. Even a known person shows slight doubt in their stories, and the first thing that they automatically start with is personal insult. He continued, of course there were master builders who were directing all that, and they did not come from the city of Rome. If you read the historical sources, you will find that Rome itself was importing qualified builders from all kinds of provinces. And then he listed the very fanciful, exotic sounding names that I haven't heard of. That is another typical approach of them, making you feel like as if you don't know anything. But later on I checked those names, and they happen to be fable locations that are considered unreal fantasy by the mainstream historians, and he was just telling them to look well versed and me feel inferior. Another very common trick by the so-called historians. Anyhow, he continued telling me how the Romans themselves were importing qualified workers and were learning, and they were coming from all kinds of territories, from Asia and Africa, territories of what is supposed to be far provinces of the Roman Empire. So he continued, if they were being hired to work in Rome, then why would you think that Romans had, as the citizens of the city of Rome, had anything to do with engineering those buildings in the faraway provinces? He continued, oh my God, they were not only importing master masons, they were importing even emperors from those places. Well, great. Sadly, he didn't know that's exactly what I was thinking anyway. But then I asked him, if all this is known to the historians, why they perpetuate such misleading lies in the textbooks and in the documentaries that it all came from the city of Rome, that they invented all these things and they built them for the conquered provinces. This is, I mean, basically stressed again and again. It's not a minor detail. It's the very basis of all the information that they present about the Roman Empire. I said, why those lies? If all that you just told me is indeed like this in the sources that you have read as a real historian, why do you agree with this history that you are supposedly defending when talking to me? He didn't have any answer. He stopped talking to me. It just looked very stupid. Actually, judging from the ruins that are found, the remains of ancient Rome, and all the maps, which basically look same, all of them. Rome was not at all some sort of a big city, it was a rather small city, and if we take its area and calculate its residents taking as 2000 people per square kilometer of number of inhabitants, which is somewhat average, then we'll find out that it counted some 10,000 people as inhabitants. The very idea that this type of settlement could provide enough number of soldiers to conquer all of the civilized world, this idea is very fishy by itself, and mainstream historians confess it as well. And here is what they say. Well, Romans simply could not find that many soldiers to maintain all of its empire. Then how did they conquer it anyway? I mean, you go one place and then what, leave the other conquered territories without soldiers? Those will revolt and get independent immediately if you leave them like that. And you cannot put only slaves in the army, because if you have too many slaves and only one Roman shouting at the top, the slaves will think, oh, just look at this, there is only one of them and he's telling us to kill our brothers. Maybe it's easier to just kill only that one on the top. He is only one. So yes, even the mainstream historians understand that it is absolutely unrealistic to think that Rome could have gathered such a big army that would conquer all these vast territories and maintain them during constant riots. If you see the history of the Roman Empire, it's full of riots just all the time. So what solution they find for this major contradiction? Well, the Romans decided, instead of keeping the population subdued with a military force, to make social improvements and build social buildings and baths and aqueducts for them, things like that, so that the population will stay happy and will voluntarily remain in the Roman Empire. Well, that's even more ridiculous. So what? There were no soldiers, they all became builders? No, that doesn't fit with the rest of the story they're telling us about the constant riots and constant required military presence and wars on the supposedly conquered territories. So instead of making it easier, they actually created double work for the soldiers. They were fighting, definitely according to their story, on one hand, and then at night they had to build the aqueducts and the Roman villas and the Roman amphitheaters, things like that. Actually, it looks even more ridiculous after this remark that they have made. This imaginary Scheherazade Grand Roman Holy Empire seems really unsustainable for a small city like Rome. Then what about the building style? Not only the villas, but the full so-called Roman cities. Maybe they are Roman as connected to the city of Rome because they are built in such a Roman style. People think that because the style is called Greco-Roman, it must have something to do with Rome, right? As far as Greece, this is just a country that got formed in year 1830, very recently. There was no Greek nation or country before that at all. I'm explaining the Greco part of the Greco-Roman, and the rest Roman is connected to the ancient Romaic culture and not with the city of Rome. This style of building and ornaments was a prevalent age before Rome had any role in the world politics, because it had some. It was a big city. It was not the role we are led to believe. Do you remember the Scythians and Sarmatians from this old map? Well, they had all the Roman style you want. Here are your Roman looking females from the Thracian gold treasure from Panaguriste. And Thracians practically for all practical purposes is just another label for this Scythian Sarmatian culture. Objects are not enough, let's go to construction. This looks pretty Roman design to me. But it is Thracian, very old, from deep antiquity. Here are your Roman columns. Here are your standard Roman design elements, again very ancient Thracian. Roman emperors are famous for their laurel wreaths. So here is your Thracian laurel wreath, much more ancient. Even the mainstream historians give very ancient dating to these Scythian, Sarmatian, Thracian, Dacian artifacts. And not only the artifacts themselves, these full cultures were, that's the meaning of these words. They flourished much before the so-called Roman times. You can see the characters depicted on them wear Roman togas, the typical Roman dress. So nothing is new. Rome did not invent anything at all. Here are more Roman togas on a ancient Thracian depiction. Speak of inventing anything, the general impression one gets by visiting Rome is that it was built at the later stages of degradation of the Romaic culture, because huge stones, maybe even megalithic, are found very rarely and mostly in the foundations of the buildings, only those with the smooth surfaces even on the inside, ones that you really find in the famous megaliths all over the world. So it was those megaliths, the building of those megaliths, the art was already getting lost as we were degrading. And at that stage, Rome was built. This is the most grand, opulent palace of Rome. It's just made of simple bricks. It is a dwarf in comparison with the grand so-called Roman constructions in other faraway provinces that was supposedly part of the Roman Empire for a very short period, but yet the Romans financed much more grand constructions over there. So we have to believe that in the remote province of Palmyra, the emperors ordered everything built out of stone and of much bigger size, while when it came to building their own palaces in Rome, they made them small and economically made them out of bricks. And here I would like to mention Napa because in a world scale it is relatively near to Rome from world perspective, and it is an excellent example of really how this megalithic culture of a building was one single for the full planet. What we see is a typical Peruvian polygonal masonry underwater in Russia, as if the footage is taken from Saxo-Herman and not from Europe. At times we see images that are very similar to megalithic piece from Japan. Here you can see them side by side. First the Japanese one on the left and the Russian one on the right. But somehow information on Anapa is extremely scarce and I see no trace of any further excavation being done. Does it follow the fate of all the other hundreds of underwater settlements found all over the world, and especially in the Mediterranean. Graham Hancock has a full book on them where he provides extensive information how when discoveries are done, always by chance, nobody is searching for them. International organizations take care that the information doesn't really reach the mainstream media, and also very good professional care is taken that it all remains suppressed on the local level and not many people hear about it, and that surely there is no reaction and surely there is no further scientific research. Such findings are of very strong evidence in support of really worldwide, obviously worldwide culture that was building megaliths of one single uniform style all over the planet. And always when it comes to the question of further excavation underwater, immediately the lack of funds is put forward. But wait a minute, all these international organizations that are cleaning the unwanted information, they are very well financed, and quite few millions of that are spent per year, every year, many, many millions. But let's get back to the tales of the Arabian Nights. It says, your wish is granted. That means that if you want to trick a full planet out of its glorious history, all you need is a bunch of penguins dressed in black suits, put them on leather chairs, tell everybody that they're respectful scientists, then tell them that if they should follow your scenario, otherwise they will lose their chairs, and here you have all it based on scientific research, newly made, cooked, fabricated history. And so are the tales of Rome, the jewel of all antique cities, the place to be, the huge, enormous megapolis, which the elite of the all universes was admiring, and so on. Where is that on the ground? This is a reconstruction of the public buildings in Rome. They are just tiny dwarfs compared to Baalbek and many other more impressive antique cities. This is from Palmyra. Palmyra is confidently labeled and famous as a Roman city, and really people think that it has to do something with the Roman Empire of Rome in Italy. Well, any connection is extremely highly questionable based on some very highly questionable note of tax that it paid supposedly to Rome. Because of that highly questionable interpretation of some note of unsure origin, we're supposed to believe that the Roman emperors built all this in a very remote province that they had very little connection with, and were very economical when it came to their own capital in Italy. The scale of building in Palmyra is far, far superior than the one in Rome. Now, this is Apamea, again in Syria. People who go there, they say there are more columns here than in Rome. The same is valid for Palmyra and many other cities. Leptis Magna in Libya. Again, it is classified as city of the Roman Empire. That's how they present it, and people naively believe it just because they have been trained to put an equation mark between ancient architecture and Rome. Or what about El Jem in Tunisia? We can get some idea of the size and opulence of this ancient city by the two grand amphitheaters. And again, it is all Roman Empire-ish. So the Romans could build two colosseums in a far, far away province that they had very little to do with. But when it came to their own capital, they were very economical and built only one. There is a great number of very impressive ancient ruins in a Romaic style. I'm using Romaic to substitute the Roman to avoid confusion, but the penguins are so busy glorifying and singing the eternal glories of the Italian Rome that they don't have time to study them. Look at this huge amphitheater in Albania. Here on Google Earth we see a very small part of the full circle, but it is huge. Another phrase that we can hear very frequently from the penguins, that it is the Greco-Romans that put the bedrock of our civilization and culture. So is there something on the Greek side that I haven't noticed that would explain the origin of the so-called origin of our civilization? Let's look into this. Unfortunately, the history of the so-called ancient Greece is even more murky than the history of the Roman Empire even. Since this famous and smart supposedly ancient Greeks supposedly could not get themselves together and form a country anytime before less than 200 years ago, that's why the penguins labeled them as even something bigger, a full civilization. Very interesting. On what basis did they do that? Is it because of some sort of artifacts, building style, art, or something like that? Not any that are available to the public, because the art and building style are very, very close, if not identical, to those of the Scythians and Sarmatians that I showed half an hour ago. These are a few more pottery pieces from Thracian, Dacians, Scythians, Sarmatians, which are all basically the same people, a bit artificially divided into various labels. But still, even the mainstream historians accept that they belong to the same culture. So on this side, I really see absolutely no reason for which the Greeks should be separated from the rest of the Scythians and Sarmatians. Moreover, the modern territory of Greece is included within the Scythian territory on the map of the ancient world, according to Ortelius, which is highly respected even by the mainstream historians. And another ancient map of Ortelius, again no mention of any Greece or even Ellada. That's how the people who live on the territory of Greece used to call their land. So since we notice no empire or any country at all, and we don't see any particular unique or distinct style of anything in this so-called ancient Greece, on what basis did they even group the people together? Who are these ancient Greeks after all? Did they have some sort of tribe or something, nation? Further, the penguins assure us that there were many tribes of which we know almost nothing, and yet two of them would stand out, the Ionians and the Dorians. But this doesn't seem to correspond at all to the artifacts of ancient Greece, because as you can see on the coinage, the presence of black people was rather tangible, and neither the main tribes nor the minor ones that the penguins are listing seem to consist of African black people. And it doesn't even end with the simple ignoring. In many cases, there are even suspicions raised that on some of the ancient Greek pottery, white paint has been applied to many figures during so-called restoration, in an attempt to cover up the big-time black presence in Ellada at that time. We have to be honest and realistic. Basically, we don't even know who was exactly living on the territory of Greece during ancient times. Another weird thing is the very name of the modern country of Greece. How did it come to name itself like that? After all, its residents call themselves Elinas, and the land that they live on, they used to call Ellada. Well, the penguins not only forced millions of people to start calling their land something else, they also caused them great deal of trouble by literally forcing on them, via the media of the educational system, to write and speak some unnatural to them language. That language was a blend from what the people were actually using, with many additions of penguin ideas of how the actual ancient Greek language was, which was mainly some sort of guesses based on some not very reliable medieval books. For full 150 years, the poor Greeks were tormented with these language reforms, and only in recent years, finally, they allowed them, to use and talk whatever language you want. But let's return to the original question. What is the meaning of this ancient Greek civilization, as the penguins call it? Did they have some sort of special symbols or something? Not really. They were using the swastika symbol again of the Scythians and Sarmatians, to which they apparently belonged. For all practical purposes, their art and decoration motif and temples and everything is full of those very same swastikas that are seen all over the world. Nothing new here. Okay, we haven't had success so far with the so-called ancient Greek civilization. Let's take it from another angle. There are so many ancient Greek inscriptions on temples and other buildings. So who made those? And here it gets very uncomfortable for the penguins. The problem comes from the fact that the language that the modern people speak there on this land has absolutely nothing to do with these inscriptions. And not only that, the tribes, which supposedly, according to mainstream historians, there is a long list of minor tribes living there as well, there is no artifact in any way confirming any of these tribes actually using this language. And as we saw in one of the earlier episodes of this series, this very language is a part of a group of such languages that were used over a vast area. Greece has no reason to claim ownership on it. They were used in many places, and they evolved on the basis of the runes that were used even wider. Basically, runes are found worldwide. That is why the penguins came up with an idea. They will think of an imaginary tribe called the Graiki something, so similar to Graiki, and those must have existed, although there is no evidence of such tribe ever. But it is hypothetical, but it exists as a hypothesis because somebody must have been writing in this language after all. In other words, just anything else but the survivors. And manufacture all kinds of ideas and different names for the same writing, just to make it appear different because it is used in different places. And there is one detail more. This Graiki, or whatever, this transcription has an alternative, very valid also, and that is Žreci. Žreci till nowadays in the Slavic languages means high priests. And that makes much more sense rather than manufacturing fantasy tribes without any evidence at all, because this ancient Greek was sophisticated and very refined language. It was not the language of this shepherd, as mainstream historians themselves assure us the Greek tribes were. By Greek tribes, I mean tribes living on the territory of what we currently call Greece. The Munich professor Vincent Brinkmann conducted a very interesting and intriguing research on the subject of how did the ancient statue really look like when they were in use by the ancient people, and he found out that they were painted, and by testing the minute particles that are still left of that paint, he could reproduce their original looks. So what we can notice from his work is that many of the gods and also people, heroes and people depicted in their daily activities on the Greek statues were actually blonde or with very light hair color. So no wonder if those Jreti or priests who were building or at least directing the construction of the so-called ancient Greek temples, probably they were pure survivors themselves with the typical Scandinavian looks and blonde hair. And as usual, again, they must have been a small minority, because blonde hair is rare amongst the current inhabitants of modern Greece. So what about all these supposedly ancient Greek authors and books that we constantly read quotations from? Well, definitely there is some truthful information in them for sure, mixed with semi-truth and frank lies. The problem is simply that we don't know which part is true, since the books, it's the same like the Roman books. They were edited by the Jesuit monks according to whatever task they had been given. So there is truth in them, we just don't know which part is that. A subject that is very rarely discussed or touched is how many of the items exhibited in the museums are really historic artifacts and how many are forgeries, recent or not so recent. This is a relatively recent one. On the left you see what they took out from the sea bottom in Croatia, and on the right you can see it restored. Here some art student was taking a selfie, and this is what happened to this historic statue. Well, the way they reported these gallery owners is that, well, anyway, this was not really that ancient, like 2000 years ago. It was made, it was a later copy, but strangely, even in their own article, they don't clarify what is a later copy, and in just a few sentences after that, when they talk about this copy, they say, well, the statue was anyway very old and badly in need of repair. It was cracking and all that. So again, they refer to it as a historic artifact. Nothing bad in having reproductions and copies in the museum, as long as that is made clear to the public, instead of posting misleading labels below the statues, you know, 2000 years old and things like that. And the main question is, since the museum vaults are full of real historic artifacts that are unexhibited under the excuse that there is no place in the museum, why do we have so many reproductions when the real ones stay hidden? Not sure what is this. Is it really ancient? Is it restoration? As far as I understand, Archaeology students are being told during their education that yes, many of the antique so-called ruins are just recently built because centuries ago that was the archaeologists' idea of how they should exhibit to the public how ruins look like by building them. Archaeology students are also taught that this is a highly disputable practice and that debates are going on if that is okay. I mean, no matter in how polite words they put it, at the end they don't put down those fraudulent inscriptions that these things are, 2000 years old when they were built just a few decades ago by so-called restoration workers. I mean, tourists pay international fares to go and see those places. Basically, they're getting defrauded. Most importantly, if any person is sincerely interested of its history as a human being, how he or she can find out what is real and what is so-called restoration? Seems to be a photo taken from the time when Pompeii was getting cleaned up, so hopefully here they didn't do any restoration and hopefully they were just cleaning, and here we also see hollow columns. Now this is coming up in the news as destruction of ancient artifacts. Are they really ancient? I mean, we were always told that they're made of stone, but inside armature is shining up. So did the ancients use the armature as well, or this? It's completely confusing. How can one find out the truth? More armature sticking out of ancient stuff. This is in Tunisia. God knows when this was built. This is from Cyprus. So if this is really ancient, then why don't they correct the school books and tell us that everything was getting cast and not carved out of stone? And if it is a recent work, why don't they put a honest inscription of what it is? I mean, they have pinned it down to the exact year 1075. I mean, bravo, these penguin scientists. Do they know when the house that they live in is built, the exact year, or do they know who is the exact lover of their wife? But they will surely know in which exact year these columns were built. This I just found on Traveler's blog. He says it's from the wall of an ancient temple in India. This is a small piece of stone taken from the Great Pyramid of Giza. It looks like the cloth that was used on the side for casting the stones got imprinted. So on the other side we do have substantial evidence about the use of geopolymers in the past, so maybe they used the armature as well. And this is again from that site in Tunisia. Somebody's sandal got printed out on the wet geopolymer. This is the shape of the sandal or shoe. And while the real artifacts are staying submerged underwater, or no permission to dig, or no funds to dig, always some excuse, while that is going on, they build completely new things from scratch and call them ancient ruins. This is an excellent example of one such ancient ruin from Germany. Anna reads the official information, tourist information, one will really get the impression that there was something Romaic here, some Roman Empire, fantasy. There was nothing there at all like this. And they really invested a great deal of care and work in fabricating suitable artifacts for their fabricated history. The biggest example is the full city of Troy. One can read Fomenko and Nosowski's excellent analysis proving that this is just a big scam built from scratch. I mean, the full scam. There are ancient ruins next to every village in Turkey. So there was something there as everywhere else in Turkey, but it wasn't Troy. The tomb of Tutankhamun also seems to be partial forgery. A lot has been written and filmed in terms of trying to investigate the really suspicious circumstances under the discovery of this tomb of Tutankhamun, but really the Fomenko and Nosowski analysis stands out as most detailed analysis and meticulous research, so I would advise everybody interested to get familiar with their research on that. Now let's visit Sagalassos in Turkey and see how the myths of the almighty Roman Empire and Greek civilization are being created and maintained. Because it has its own large amphitheater and impressive antique ruins, but that is common for many villages in Turkey. Beautiful, large, very large antique statues were unearthed in Sagalassos. Immediately it was announced that large Roman statues have been found. They even recognized the guy immediately. It is Marcus Aurelius and nobody else. How did they know? Was it written somewhere or some other clue or something? It is just presented as absolutely scientific, undisputable truth without providing any evidence or a reason whatsoever. And when they say Roman, people subconsciously, of course, connected with this so-called Roman Empire with its center in Italy. And also, why did they call the so-called ancient Greek civilization Greek and not ancient Turk civilization? That would make more sense because they have named it after the modern name of the land where supposedly those tribes lived on. But since those tribes lived on the territory of another modern country, which is Turkey, then the correct name should be ancient Turkish civilization, right? Because the majority of ancient Greek ruins are found in Turkey. And what happens when uncomfortable ruins are found at places where they should not be, like St. Petersburg? I mean, officially, people there were really monkeys just a few centuries ago. They didn't have any ancient culture at all. But ancient ruins came up. Well, what to do with them? What to do? The real archaeologists that were working on them, well, their working contracts were just cancelled and new correct ones were appointed that quickly excavated the site. That's what they call it. With bulldozers. And do you notice the pile of stone behind? Those are the ancient ruins ready for disposal. So the new bulldozer archaeologists were extremely successful to accomplish the desired task, and now modern building is very quickly being built over there, of course, with huge, vast underground parking, so that there is no trace left of the uncomfortable ruins. So if it wasn't the great Holy Roman Empire or the ancient so-called Greeks that built all this Romaic antique stuff, then who did it? All that was described in the old books, and that's why they made those huge bonfires in all European cities, really huge fires. It wasn't the Martin Luther books, nor all that Reformation war was about church bells, organ music, and translating books into other dialects. It was not by chance that they even organized border police at that time to search the travelers and check out all their books and writings and burn anything suspicious. It was really very important for them to erase all traces of history, but we are fortunate few of those banned books survived till date. One such book is the work of the Italian monk Mauro Urbini. He bases his writings on a few hundred older books and also provides extensive reference list from where did he take this information, and almost all of those books are in the banned list and are lost forever. This is what Mauro Urbini tells us. It is not by chance that they are called the scattered ones. They divided into small groups and went out to spread their culture, and then he lists practically all the provinces and places where we see the so-called Romaic or Greco-Roman culture and ruins. In this way, the terms scattered refers really and exactly to the survivors. So I'm not really trying to introduce some sort of new hypothesis about history. I'm just trying to establish the old knowledge that got lost. Let's now visit Castel Sant'Angelo in Italy. After all, it was the residence of the popes, and maybe there were some artifacts, inscriptions, or something that could tell us about the real history. What we see there are the emblems of the various popes placed very high on the building, places that are difficult to access. And yet they are all vandalized and broken in a very ugly manner. Somebody must have had a very good reason to climb that high and destroy them in this ugly way. Of course, there is official explanation for everything. That was done driven by religious hatred to certain pope, and that's why they destroyed the shields. They couldn't look at them. They hated him. Very strange though. They made the endeavor to place scaffolding and stuff and climb so high and destroy his emblem, and yet they left intact his statues that are easily reachable. They were so full of hatred that they couldn't look at his emblem, yet they left his name clearly visible and intact with big letters. And how come that actually all the emblems of, or most of them, are destroyed, of most popes, even though they didn't belong to this pope that was the hated one? Most likely these emblems and shields were destroyed in this way because they didn't fit the fabricated history. If it was really the later popes hating an earlier one, they would have done it in a different way. Not this is a luxurious and opulent castle, and it is extremely unlikely that its own residents vandalized it in this way. Probably the reason and the scenario of destruction of these important historic artifacts were completely different. Well, this point was noted again by Fomenko and Nosovsky, and everything I said so far about the Greco-Roman culture and empire and all that is really a very concise synopsis. If you want to read everything in great detail, please see my video with instructions on how to read and understand the books of Fomenko, and you can start doing it today. It is available for free on his website in English. It is extremely important to keep us overloaded with work as donkeys, otherwise we may get time to start questioning who are we, where did we come from, and why are we on this earth. For that reason, it is very important to keep us away from the secrets of technology, aka magic. And that is why there are so many Roman belonging to the scattered people or survivors achievements, but we have no clue how did they do that. All supposedly ancient texts talk about everything else but not the technologies understand magic that we don't know about. It's very carefully filtered and our attention is distracted with things like the Roman invented kissing. Did you know even that? That is aired on the main TV channels. So this is what we could do before the clever Romans invented kissing. But what about the old depictions on coins and paintings of things magical, aka technical in the skies? Well, here the famous mystery trick is employed. Declare it a mystery and then you can exclude it from history. Or what about the famous Vernise cup that is supposedly an antique artifact 2000 years old? It's made of an extremely hard stone, sardonyx. We are being assured that at that time there was no technology that could allow them to work with that stone, let alone make such marvelous art out of it, fine art. Well, in this case, most likely it is just a 200 years old artifact, as most other antique artifacts that were being shown. But grossly mistaken dating cannot explain things always. For example, the very famous Lycurgus cup that changes its color. Nanotechnology was used to manufacture it. And even the modern engineers took wisdom from it and did reverse engineering to improve their nanotechnologies. Why did they decide to exaggerate the importance of Rome so much? Is it because it's in Western Europe? To reinforce the authority of the institutions, corporations, and certain entities that are above law and make them look like givers of civilization? Or was really a Rome really a great center of the degradation ideas in the Romaic society? I don't know who is the real person depicted on this statue, but I know who is his guru. And so many of us have turned into their disciples without even knowing it. While at the same time, our primeval teachers, the ones that came to give us wisdom and magic, aka technology, lay buried in the sand, forgotten.